We'll leave 15 minutes at the end for some Q&A, so please do drop anything in the chat box. We're really looking to be as engaged with you guys as possible. And I do need to stress that everything discussed here is purely information, so nothing can be construed as financial advice. Also worth noting that we at HL may not share the views of our guests from Finder, and of course vice versa. So let's take a look at the agenda for today. So first, Louise and Liz will take us through budgeting and ways to get more visibility so you can keep on top of it and we can all have a bit more conscious budgeting, especially during these times. Then we'll look at debt. In this current environment, of course, more and more people are forced to borrow. That doesn't mean it has to be all bad news. From here, we'll explain why it's a really good idea to have a cushion, that emergency fund. As you'll all know, things are getting more expensive, so it's a really good idea to have that one. Then we'll dish the dirt on the gender pension gap and share our tips on how you can power up your pension with small actionable steps that you can go away and do in the next couple of weeks. And last and certainly not least, if you're lucky enough to have all of your financial resilience building blocks in place and some money left over by the end of the month, we'll touch on how to take your first step into investing. So before we go into the investing, of course, households have been in the trenches for 2 years now. We've had the pandemic. Now, of course, we are in the cost of living crisis, so we are all feeling the impact of that. Liz, why is it so important that we all try and live within our means, more so as life gets more expensive?
That's right. Prices have been rising and interest rates have been rising as well. So more people have been missing payments and getting into debt, and debt is more expensive than it used to be. So just in the last 12 months, the average interest rate on credit cards has shot up by about 2 percentage points, for example, and that makes it all the more important to avoid having to pay interest if you possibly can, because once you start down that road, it's harder to come back. So if you feel that you're not living within your means, seeing where ways to see where your money's going. So firstly, we've got another slide on that. Firstly, there's getting to know your bank statement better, and you can also use free budgeting tools and apps. We list some good ones of those on Finder. Digital banking apps that automatically categorise your spending for you can help too. So once you've got that overview of where your money's going, you can see where you might be paying over the odds for things or paying for things that you don't need. And so, for example, if you've got TV streaming or magazine subscriptions that you might not be using or you're using very much, you could downgrade, or you might consider switching services, insurance and so on to save money as well. And ask yourself, when did you last shop around for things like insurance? All of those are great ways to start cutting back the waste and stop overpaying. And it makes, once you cut the waste, it's easier to stay on track and avoid debt and interest that you don't need to pay. So once you've dealt with the waste, you can set a budget for yourself. And there are loads of different types of budget. Some people swear by the 70-20-10 approach. That's 70% of your income on needs, 20% on wants, and then trying to save 10%. But there are plenty of others that are 50-30-20 version of that as well. When you've decided on your budget, it's worth checking in regularly using tools like this one, which is on the HL site, to see whether you're on track. And you might need to adjust your budget if you find you're not sticking to it. And I think the key to all of this is about staying in control of your finances. The more you're aware of where the money's going, the more you're able to control it. Rather than
Yes, thanks, Liz. I am going to talk a bit now about financial wellness. And before I get stuck in, I can appreciate that term might feel a bit jarring, especially with the backdrop of the pandemic recovery and the cost of living crisis. But it really is a key part of the solid that Liz has been just talking about there. So a recent Finder survey found that 1 in 3 UK adults reported that money worries have impacted their mental health, and 7 in 10 Brits have experienced stress related to their finances over the last year. So it's really clear that money and mental health have never been more interconnected. And just as we might exercise and eat well to boost our mental and physical health, there are practical steps we can take to boost our financial well-being. So I kind of think of this in 3 parts. First is simply building good money habits. Create that realistic budget, review your statements regularly, and if you have money left over, prioritize your savings. The second step is to stick to those habits, and also to reframe any negative money beliefs that you have that could be holding you back. You know, and it can be sort of even neutral affirmations, if not positive ones. So I'm bad with money becomes I'm learning to be better with money. And the final stage of all of this is about future-proofing your financial self. So we're going to be talking more about this later on, things like building your emergency fund, paying into a pension, and just generally making your money work harder for you. And all of these things should really help to take some of the stress away that happens when you're uncertain about your finances.
Absolutely, thank you. So as we've just discussed, financial resilience really is more important than ever, especially during this most trying time. At Hargreaves Lansdown, we created a framework for people to build their resilience. It's called 5 to Thrive, or the 5 building blocks, as we like to call it. Importantly, it really encourages all of us to look at our finances as a whole. So we might sometimes focus on debt as one goal, or saving your emergency fund as one, but actually to build your financial resilience, we look at it all together, and we can see how that affects our resilience as one. So there's 5 building blocks. One's looking at debt, one is your protection, one is saving that penny for a rainy day, and then planning for later life. And then, as I said, once you've got all of these, basic important pieces in place, only then should you ever think about investing. So obviously it's quite a fluid situation at the moment. We've seen huge changes in the way of living and the cost of it. We've seen inflation rise and fall. Interest rates are the highest that they've been for a very long time. And we're always looking for the next thing, and it really can't be predicted at the moment. But what is clear is that we're all feeling the pinch. So the pressure and the pain points are very different on an individual basis, because very much like the pandemic, the distribution of the cost of living crisis across society is pretty unequal. And I think you'd all agree with that. And this filters into our finances. So it really does make for pretty scary reading that 9 in 10 adults are reporting that their cost of living has increased. That's actually around 46 million people in the UK, which is huge. And undoubtedly, this has seen an increase in the risk of running up debt. So we're seeing an increased credit and debt reliance fueled by this current situation. And 1 in 8 people are now borrowing to fund the daily essentials. So the first step in building your financial resilience is very important, and that's really just controlling your debt. It's absolutely inevitable that we'll all have debt in our lives. Not all debt is bad debt. It's a necessity for the majority of us when we're looking to buy property or attend a university, both of which can be seen as clear investments into our futures. But what's really important is that we can manage it, that we control it and it doesn't control us, not letting it spiral to become a real threat to your financial future. And if you have lots of credit card debt or expensive short-term debt, then paying that down really should be your first priority. And Liz, do you have any tips on how we might go about doing that?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Laura. As you say, paying down that debt as quickly and as cheaply as possible is the absolute priority. So if you're paying lots of interest on a credit card balance, it is worth considering a balance transfer credit card. And there are some that will give you more than a year of breathing space at 0 interest and 0 fees. But during that time, it's absolutely critical that you make a plan to ensure that you can pay off that balance before the end of that period, or you will end up paying high interest rate on the balance after that. But those cards are a breathing space, and it is worth considering them. If you're thinking of taking out any credit cards or loans, it's worth checking out your credit score and your credit history first, because that's what lenders are going to be looking at when they decide whether to lend you any money or allow you to take out a credit card, and crucially the rate that they will offer you. So you can see your credit score for free through Finder, along with ways to help you build it up so that you would qualify for better interest rates and better deals and cards that you might not have qualified for with a lower rate. And there's a QR code there that will take you straight to the credit score page on Finder there.
Thank you. That's an absolutely brilliant resource. So once we look at having our first building block in place, so that's having a handle on your debt, it's looking at protecting you and your loved ones. So ensuring that you have life insurance in place if you have dependents, or ensuring that you set up a will if you have children. It's quite often one of those things that you think you'll deal with later, but it actually doesn't take as long as you think to set these things up, and it gives you that real security blanket, knowing that your loved ones are looked after. So protecting your income and any loved ones is paramount when it comes to building financial resilience. If you were to pass away or become ill or suffer an injury, for example, it can have rippling effects, as I'm sure you can imagine. And that's why protection insurance is so essential. So even if if the worst would happen, you or your loved ones will have protection. And then we move on to your emergency fund. So I'm sure that you're all aware of having an emergency fund, why it's a good idea. We should all have one. It's also known as your rainy day money. And for some in this current climate, it might be that you need to start from scratch or rebuild that pot, because quite understandably, you may have had to dip into it over the last 24 months. So it's generally suggested that we save between 3 to 6 months of essential expenses. So that's your needs, not your wants, so the necessities. And that is actually easier to achieve than you first might think. We often get asked to put a monetary figure on this. Unfortunately, there's no magic number, because I'm sure you're all aware that everyone varies and it depends on your own circumstances and lifestyle. So this figure will be different for everyone, especially everyone listening today, because we'll all have different overheads. Some might have a child at private school. Some might consider their gym membership as a essential expense. So it'll all look very differently. But what's key is starting small is better than not starting at all. So just those small, consistent habits can make a really big impact. And I think you'll be really surprised at how quickly you can build up that fund. It should be held in your own name. It should be in touching distance. So if you do need that money, you can get it out quickly. And ideally, this will be held as cash. So in an instant access savings account, really. You'll just need to look at the penalties. And some might think that if you have this emergency fund, it should just be left in your standard bank account. It's the easiest thing to do. It's what you've always done, for example. But Louise, is that true? Is that the best place to keep that money?
Well, a lot of it, as you say, Laura, really depends, on your personal circumstances. But I would say that 3 good general rules for an emergency fund is that it is separate from your day-to-day spending, it's easily accessible, and that it earns interest. So it's doing something for you while it's sitting there. One of the upsides we've seen to rising inflation has been higher interest rates on savings accounts. So now's the time to take advantage of rates around 5% on instant access savers and up to 8% on regular savers. just be aware, you spoke about those penalties, Laura, that regular savers will often limit the number of withdrawals you can make in a year. And if you do go over that limit, your interest rate might be lowered. So just look out for those in the T's and C's. And, you know, if you're someone who doesn't like a lot of separate accounts, then digital challenger banks and digital challenger apps, budgeting apps, they can all offer quite a neat solution for you. So some of these apps, they'll offer interest on your account balance. So you don't need to move money around to earn a bit of interest on it. Other accounts have savings pots or different spaces where you can easily move money just even within your account. And those could be turned into instant access savings pots in a few taps on your phone. So those are quite sort of easy, convenient products. And then budgeting apps can be really helpful because a lot of them now you can earn interest, and you can also automate your emergency fund. So it can work out how much you can afford to save and it can put that away for you. So those can be really convenient tools for people.
Brilliant, thank you. And then why have those emergency savings? So of course, it's impossible to predict anything that might go wrong. If we look just a few months ago, we had the flight cancellations due to the air traffic control issue. So I, for example, along with thousands of people, were stuck and unable to get home. My flight was cancelled, and luckily I had that emergency pot to get back home to my daughter, as I'd already been away from her for far too long. It was an 8-hour ferry trip to Barcelona, but let's not dwell on that. The point is I got home because luckily I did have that pot set aside, but I know that there were a lot of people that were in a very different position than that. But aside from those flight cancellation, it can also buy you more time by providing replacement income. So if you were to lose your job unexpectedly, or if you did become ill, for example, it really provides that little buffer just to keep you and buy you a bit of time. Our research shows that 4 in 10 women had a surprise cost in the last year, and the most frequent amount for that was £500 to £1,000, which is huge. But actually nearly 1 in 5 of those unexpected costs was more than £3,000, which is a really hard figure to pull together on a whim. So having that emergency pot boosts your financial security and reduces the likelihood of people turning to credit when life does throw you those curveballs. And as life has got more expensive, you know, inflation has risen, the cost of living has risen, it's really important that you review your emergency fund to check that that sum of money that you've saved will still buy you those 3 to 6 months. And just get into the habit of reviewing that. I don't know about anyone online, but I've recently remortgaged, and that has basically doubled my mortgage costs. So I have had to then revisit my emergency fund. So that is our third building block, and that looks at your short-term resilience. So it's your safety net. And then if we move towards your financial security, it's made of multiple components, and one of those is your pension. Pensions do play an important role in securing your long-term financial resilience. They aren't dressed up as these sexy things, but they're really important that we pay our pension some attention, especially if you are a female. So we're all pretty familiar with the gender pay gap on this call, and I'm sure it exists, it's been spoken about, but what isn't spoken about as much is the difference between men and women's pension pot at retirement age. So it's much bigger than the pay gap, but much less known for some reason. And so by the time women reach retirement age, they will actually on average have £100,000 less in their pension than men. And that really matters because, simply put, the size of your pension will impact your standard of living in retirement and what you can do and what you can achieve in those freedom years. And here's the thing, women need to contend with all these challenges and considerations that impact our all the years that we spend building that pension pot. So we have childcare, we have career breaks, we have care breaks. We're most likely to bring up the children. we're most likely to care for our elderly parents. We had COVID-19 that really impacted women more than it did men. Of course, it impacted everybody, but had significant impact on women. And now we have the cost of living crisis. So if you assume you'll have a career break, because let's face it, most women do at some point in their lives, you should think about saving, continuing to save into your pension so your money has longer to grow. So what are the sort of steps that we can do now, quite actionable steps that we can all do to close that pension gap? Pay in as much as you can afford and get the tax relief you deserve. So that's by ensuring you get the maximum contribution from your employer. Most employers will do a matching program, so a like for like. The more that you put in, the more that they do, which is a really, really big benefit that most of us should be taking advantage of. Then we've got the uplift in our own personal contributions, so we can add more in, we can increase our percentage contributions. There are times that you might think about that. So if you get a new job or if you get a pay increase, they're really key times to start thinking about whether if you just tweak those percentages going into your pension, it will make a big impact on the long term, and you might not feel the pinch in the short term. And like I said, if you're going on maternity leave, for example, try and maintain your contributions. So if you were putting in 5% before you went on mat leave, keep that 5%. The 5% will come from your new pay, so whether it's statutory or your reduced earnings, but your employer has to continue matching it at your employed level, which is, again, a great benefit to take advantage of if you are going on maternity leave. So then we look into savings. So we have got on top of our debt, we have protection, we've got our emergency fund, and we're talking and thinking about our pension and our long-term financial resilience and what that retirement is going to look like. Then we need to think about saving in cash and investing. Now, you can keep it as cash, and when is the right time to save as cash? There's obviously clearly lots of reasons to save as cash, and Louise, you'll be the expert in why this is.
Yes, well, yeah, there are many reasons why you might want to keep your savings as cash. One key reason is for easy access. So, for example, if you're saving for an emergency fund, or you're saving for a sort of a real upcoming imminent purchase like a holiday or a property, and you basically don't want to get stung with fees or lower interest rates for withdrawing money early. The catch-22 though is that with these easy access accounts, they often come with lower rates and fewer rewards than more restrictive accounts. So you just need to find that balance of what works for you. An example of this, so as a recent first-time buyer myself, I went for a two-pronged cash savings approach. So I put half my savings into a lifetime ISA, where I was able to earn a good interest rate plus that 25% bonus on my balance every tax year. And then that balance could be put towards the actual purchase of my property. And then the other half of my savings, I put in a high interest, easy access savings account. So this was to cover ad hoc expenses like furniture or solicitor's fees, just anything that I would sort of need instantly. And in this way, I could maximize my rewards and avoid any of those withdrawal penalties. So I found that quite effective system for myself. Another reason for keeping your savings in cash is because you're not willing to take on a huge amount of financial risk. With a cash ISA versus a stocks and shares ISA, for example, you can have the peace of mind that your balance is just going to steadily accrue interest without being affected by any sort of market volatility.
Brilliant, thank you. And then on the flip side, you do have investing. So this is where you take your cash and put it somewhere to ultimately, hopefully, make it grow over the long term. But for this to happen is really important, as Louise suggested, that you have a long-term goal in mind. So what we mean by that is at least 5 years. So investing can be good for income or growth. By this, we mean some companies will pay you dividends if you're a shareholder. And by growth, we mean that your overall pot of money will grow or has the potential to get bigger over time if you're investing in the stock market. Of course, there's a better chance of beating inflation here as well. Bearing in mind, the stock market does fluctuate, so your money does go up and down. You could get back less than what you have originally invested. And then if you're thinking that you might be ready to take that first step in investing, where to do it? The first consideration is the account that you're looking at. So that's almost like your basket of where to hold your investments. So it's important to consider the most tax efficient way to do that. And looking at ISAs is a sensible approach here. So on one hand, you have your stocks and shares ISA, and on the other hand, you can also have a cash ISA. And that will again depend on your long or short term goals for this money. Every tax year you have £20,000 an allowance, and that's across all of the ISAs that you hold. And the main benefit here is that your money can grow free of any UK tax. So within the ISA, you can choose your investments, and you can access your money at any time. And as we stated before, of course, investing should only be considered for the long time. And then if you're not quite there yet, if you're not quite ready to make that step into investing, that's of course absolutely fine. And then a cash ISA might be a more sensible approach for you at this time. And then just to add another ISA into the mix, as Louise touched on, we can add the lifetime ISA in, and this could be used to buy your first property up to £450,000, or it can be used to help fund your retirement from the age of 60. There are a couple of rules here, so you can open one if you're between the ages of 18 and 39, and you can choose to save up to £4,000 in here, but the real bonus here is that the government will add 25%, so up to £1,000 every single tax year into your lifetime ISA. One thing to note is that if you did need the money for something else other than your first home or your retirement at the age of 60, you're likely to get charged. So that 25% that the government adds in, they'll likely charge you on the way out again. And then you have your account. So you've chosen your ISA, for example. And then we look at Girls Just Want to Have Funds. I won't sing it for you here, but funds are a really good option for your first investment. But what are they and how do they work? So they're a really popular option. Essentially, they're a collective investment. So investors' money is pooled together, and then an expert fund manager will invest that money on your behalf. Where they invest is dependent on the goal of that fund. So you can have some in particular regions, the UK, the US, for example, Asia. But there's also some that are geared towards generating an income, more towards growth. Funds that can invest in a range of areas, really, including shares, property, bonds, as well as a proportion of cash. And that's where you get that real benefit. So you're spreading the risk, and someone's doing it on your behalf, which is brilliant. And the main thing that sets it apart from a share, for example, which is a lot more volatile, is that your investor's money is pooled together. So you're reducing that risk. And then if you do choose to invest, there's just a couple of golden rules that we like to go through. So higher risk doesn't always mean higher rewards. You probably would have seen a lot of trending emojis and Reddit blogs recently on individual shares, for example. And then you would have seen the crash and the burn afterwards. So higher risk doesn't always mean higher rewards. It's best just to get your foot in the door and keep investing and dripping it into something that you're confident in. And then secondly, time in the market is not timing the market. So it's absolutely impossible to predict what the market will do. You can't choose the perfect time to invest and the perfect time to sell. It will always bite you in the bum somehow. So time in the market and not timing the market, even if you keep dripping, £25 a month every month, just dripping it in, and then you can ride those waves rather than, hitting them, trying to hit at the bottom and sell at the top. It's really crucial when it comes to investing. And that brings this session to a close. So if you've got any questions, please do pop them into the Q&A, and we'll run through those shortly. a final slide from our compliance team, so please do take a few minutes to read through these important notes. They reiterate that this session was purely informational, nothing was financial advice, and that stock market investments can decrease as well as increase in value. And then any tax rules that we've discussed, so the ISA tax rules and tax benefits, are subject to change in the future. And then I'll just open it up to any questions that anybody has. I've got one for Liz to start us off. You spoke about the 70-20-10 budgeting. I'd never heard of this before. I just wondered if you could give us a little bit more information about how you might set that up.
Well, I think there are various kind of budgeting tools where you can just put your information in and see whether that kind of broadly that's where your income is going. So in terms of essentials with that one, you'd be let's say that you had, I don't know, an income of £1,000 a month take home, then you'd be looking to see whether you're spending 700 on essentials and 200 on discretionary spend, wants, and that you were able to save £100. I don't know of any tools which will kind of help you divide it up that way, but I think some of the budgeting apps will help you kind of see at a glance the kind of categories where the spending is going, which will give you a kind of broad overview of essentials versus restaurants or takeaways versus what's going in a savings pot. So that the 70-20-10 is just an example. As I said, there's also 50-30-20. Louise, do you know of any other?
I mean, there's a split of all those different proportions, but I think it's just being sensible. Your essentials are always going to be the most, and then it's kind of, you can, as Liz was saying earlier, once you figure out your ingoings and your outgoings, really being aware of what your spending habits are will define what budget works for you, really.
The key thing, I think, is to see whether once the electricity bills or the energy bills and the food spending and the council tax and that type of thing, once those are dealt with, then it's about looking at what's left over and is there room to cut back on some of the kind of wants, the subscriptions, whether you could downgrade or switch or that type of thing, to make more room for the saving and try and kind of bump up that proportion of it.
Absolutely. I think I've been saying for months that I need to downgrade my Sky, and this might just prompt me to finally do it. The other question I have, which I get asked a lot, and actually I don't know the answer to myself, is if I think there's a rumour that if you check your credit score, it affects your credit score. Is that true?
No. So if you use Finder's free credit score, and of course there are other free credit scores that you can use as well, and just checking your credit score will not affect your credit score or credit history at all. And equally, using eligibility checkers, so Finder has one, other sites have them as well, and using an eligibility checker, it will tell you that checking which cards or loans you're available for won't affect your credit rating. So that's also worth bearing in mind. You can just have a look to see what you qualify for, and it won't have any impact on your credit score.
That is very useful. And then we've just got a question, or I think just more of a signposting really in the chat. So Louise, probably one for you. categorizing apps to help split the budget. Do you have any that you could recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads. I would never sort of specifically recommend something to an individual. I guess I can give you a sort of overview of some, and then the idea would be go away, research it, see if it's right for you, even down to whether you like the colors on the app. I think if you've got something, every time you open it and you hate it, you're never going to use it. So, really think about if the app works for you. But we've got comparisons on Finder/savings-accounts if you guys want to go and check out some stuff there. But My Digital Challenges, things like Monzo and Starling, they automatically categorize stuff for you. So you can use those for day-to-day spending, and then you can go in and look after like a month and see what it's categorized your spending as. And then there are savings apps or budgeting apps like Plum and Emma, which are really helpful. And they use open banking, so they're going to link all of your accounts together and do a lot of the hard work for you. So they can be really useful. But as I say, what we would always recommend is have a look through a whole bunch of them and find the right one that works for you.
Absolutely. And I think that's just been dropped in the chat. So that's brilliant. And just as a reminder, everyone online, you can follow Financially Fearless on Instagram or sign up today. We've got a great incentive running at the moment, which you'll find on our webpage. And all you have to do is simply sign up and you'll be automatically entered, which is fabulous. We have just one more question to go through, actually, that's just popped up. So from Katie, a guest, is open banking grouping your bank accounts together? I've never heard of the term.
Yeah, so open banking is just basically a system where it can look through all of your data of all of your bank accounts. So you have to sort of input the accounts you want to be linked up. It's not doing this behind your backs or anything like that. For example, when I first had Plum, the budgeting app, it asked me to link up all the accounts I wanted it to look through, and then it uses data from open banking to kind of check through those and see what you're spending on, how much money is going in every month, and it does that work of looking at your ingoings and outgoings for you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So thank you to Liz and Louise from Finder for joining. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. This session will be recorded and sent to the wider audience who signed up. Again, huge apologies for the tech issues. It was bound to happen trying something new for the first time, but I am absolutely gutted it happened here. We will send out the recording, and we perhaps might put on something else to try to get everyone back on board here. But thank you again, and thank you so much for your time, and have a lovely Wednesday afternoon.